So I'm also one of those who misunderstood, and so in a way that we are not showing any images, not doing any presentations. So, but still, I will show something at the end. But this is not the main point. Just some small addition to what I will say. What I say is also not a statement of something I'm totally sure of. It's rather a field which I propose to explore. I proposed the term unrest, but it might be something different, because I see that unrest is might be understood as for riots or in the activist context. This is not actually what I mean. I mean one of those names for dialectical subject. Unrest is Hegelian, but one can also speak of fiction. This was another term which I was contemplating, and maybe it fits better the context, but there are also other verbs for that: imposture, emigration, diaspora, translation, also freedom, strangely, and some other terms. And speaking about that, I probably should, to make myself clear, I probably should say what is dialectical reflexing subject is not, so to set some frame of references. So this is certainly what I'm not, what I do not agree with is identity politics. It's sure we all are not. Some sort of essentialism of identities, although I would say that now it's not completely clear that what kind of some sort of identities is in movement or in between identities or trans identities in whatever sense of the word also can be essentialized. This is something what I would really try not to do. Another meaning of the word subjectivization, actually, which comes to the mind immediately, is the definition of the subject by outside forces, definition and interpellation in Althusserian sense, in Foucault, in the sense of Foucault, which was not that much mentioned in our conversation, although this term subjectivization immediately points to him and to the ideas that subject is does not really has autonomy and is being defined. So is already dead, yeah, so to speak, as an author, and is being defined by outside forces of society, and this is something which precedes the subject. I still think that even under those circumstances, subjects do have freedom. And the third thing which I'm rather distancing myself from is this total rejection of universalism, which we are witnessing on all the fronts, and which reminds me more and more of the total rejection of communism. And so the question is, of course, very complicated, and I'm not raising it now. I just may say that in my very extremely superficial knowledge of Brazilian anthropophagia theory, I came across while the Cologne Academy published a book on the subject, curated by one artist, and I was really inspired by the notion of multinaturalism by Eduardo Viveiras de Castro, if I'm not mistaken, who proposes that unlike this multiculturalism, which implies like differences of cultures, and we all know to what problems it leads. So he was writing that actually the culture, this is something we are sharing, all of us, while our bodies might be actually very different, the natures we're finding ourselves in. This is something I find myself agreeing to. So I see universalism or universalisms as actually space for dialectics, certainly, while the cluster of localities is actually not for me. In this sense, as an art historian and curator, I'm interested in subjects that want to be something else. I relate very much to the notion of desire, which was mentioned here, the desire to be someone else, or not to be something which is imposed on you. I think it's something very interesting and important, but I'm also interested in objects which wants to be something else. So I'm interested in artworks which represent a desire to reach a certain level, for instance, of quality, but do not really do it. So I'm really, so in this sense, I have this perverse interest in some bad 19th century paintings which represent, and sometimes also certainly connected to this colonial context, something which tries to reach the level of, let's say, academic painting, but creates mistakes on the way. So this is something which is extremely interesting for me and contemporary artists who are working with that thing as well. So I might then briefly read, maybe summarizing and comment what I've written. So the notion of unrest is at the core of Hegelian definition of the subject, where Hegel refers to Aristotle, for whom subject is the one who moves by oneself, by itself or herself. So this is the main characteristic of the subject, which is mobile and exists in time, while the object, and we cannot speak about the subject without the object, object is occupying space. So the birth of the modern subject is very much connected to this notion of mobility. It's the notion of flaneur or leisurely, less leisurely displacement connected to more political contexts. So this is at the core of subject and subjectivizations. And this movement of object, which is at the core of global economy. Also, we all know that subjects are not that mobile. They are not allowed to be that mobile, but some of the advanced subjects like us, like members of international art community that actually do try to circulate and to participate in different contexts under different circumstances. The object as well is under this performative turn inside objecthood. Art object is also in unrest and has this temporal dimension I was talking about my lecture yesterday. So from here, I was writing about two vectors, and one is rather about object and another one is about subject rather. The first vector is about this unrest of the object and this performative turn and time-based and time-specific display I was talking yesterday, where the notion of time is more and more integrated into the display itself, and also the object is being subjectivized. So this is actually would be the first, when I was told subjectivization, this was the first idea I had, how the object is subjectivized, how the object during the whole history of 20th century art, this discrepancy, dilemma, unbalanced, hierarchical relation of object and subject was deconstructed and decolonized. So it can be seen at the central point of decolonizing movement and practice. And also it exists in a purely level of art, very much so. Artists of the early avant-garde, they were trying to consider the object, something which is in front of them, as another human being, another subject, a friend, and to build a completely different relation between themselves and those objects. And contemporary temporality of display, I place it in the same dynamic. It's also challenging our notion of quality, very much so, which is not enough reflected, where we would not, we are not judging another human being as we judge a work of art from the point of view of pure quality. And so we probably should not judge the work of art as we should not judge on the same conditions a human being. And in a way, we already are moving out of this quantitative comparison. I was very much also inspired by what was mentioned in Andret's proposal, Hannah Arendt, what she's writing about quality and quantity. So this human value, which should not be measured, ideally. So this would be the cluster of ideas, summarized very briefly, which I have on the notion of subjectivization of the art object. The second part is unrelated, and it's about immobilized subjects. So as I said, this mobile subject is the central subject of modernity, as well as modernism. But I'm interested, so I think what is being overlooked also in our this massive interest in the figure of migrant, refugees, certainly it overlooks also people who cannot afford being migrants or refugees. So as I'm mentioning here, we just presented a new play by Keti Chukhrov, which was initially called Not Even Refugees. And it's about people who were not privileged enough as to be able to quit the place where I'm staying. So those people who are immobilized by the lack of political agency or the political circumstances or economically challenges, this is something which might be overlooked in contemporary interest in those displacements, actually. And of course, my own experience and knowledge of this Soviet Union experience of not being able to leave your country, not being able to emigrate or even to move. This is something which is what is important for me, and I'm relating to this also very dialectical clash in between extremely global horizons, and this is something I also can relate to people from different contexts, but this is something what I recognize from my past, extremely global horizons. This was the horizons of our education, where it was Marx, Shakespeare, or I don't know, Verdi, were among the number ones, while the Russian culture was actually considered something less universal, at least. But that was combined in a very harsh, even I would say sadistic way to the impossibility to leave the country. So you were studying Parthenon and, I don't know, Louvre, but at the same time you were told openly that that is something you will never see in reality, that it has to remain your virtual horizons. And so this discrepancy, this sort of rift which was created there, it also is something which might have been even productive for artists and writers, and something which interests me still. So I'm interested in mechanisms of over jumping, yeah, so to speak, those rifts, and one of those mechanisms is fiction. So fictionality, fictional identities, imposters. This is something which was always fascinating me. What I forgot to also to mention that the philosophy of the human subject in these communist times was all about these radically wide horizons, and the human subject has to be a holistic one. The term was всесторонний. I hope some of you will understand, which means not just even universalist, but it's a very geographical, even I would say, physical description of coming from all the sides, encompassing. And here I can remember some ideas of the Russian avant-garde, where artists were saying that people should be able to see also with the back of your head, like being able to see in 360 degrees. So this notion of всесторонний, holistic, has this character. So one has to be this universalist, encompassing, which was opposed to narrowly specialized. And narrow specialized was something Western, something capitalist, and something certainly bad, and also interestingly considered as ugly. So it's a very typical expression, ugly one-sidedness. So one-sidedness is ugly, and this universalist encompassing is also beautiful. So it's somehow connected to ethical and aesthetical experience. So among those mechanisms of overcoming this thing were, of course, translation irony, cynicism, however we would understand those words, construction of the subject in opposition to this hegemonic institutional narrative. And to finish with, I'll just show a couple of images showing my interest in fictionality. And this is the exhibition we did together with David Reef as the first Bergen Assembly in 2013. Does it work? Or like that? Which was based on the science fiction novel of Soviet writers, Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, Monday Begins on Saturday. And this novel, short satirical novel, represents a research institute in Soviet Union where people are researching human happiness with the help of magicians from very different contexts, of different fairy tales. Okay, what am I doing? Sorry, what am I pressing? Yeah, can you help me? What am I pressing? No, I would prefer that. Yeah, this one. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so this would be the writers, very typical romantic 60s, and I also would prefer it not to go by itself. Yeah, you know, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. So we did this assembly in 11 different venues in the city of Bergen in Norway, a small town with lots of small art institutions, and we read all of them as those fictitious research institutes related to the Institute of Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, where our artists were also researching human happiness and perspectives of it, and this is the map of Bergen, which we read the whole city as this text of fiction, and we tried to transform every of those 11 venues, presenting them as those institutes, and the common denominator was always plans, electronic clock, and also metal plate with a quote from the novel. So this was an element which was supposed to indicate that this is one of those institutes. So in a way we created, to what extent it was possible, some sort of a total installation through the whole exhibition and integrated artworks into it. So these are one of those plates. So this was one of the biggest spaces of ours, post-industrial space, which we transformed into a Kafkaesque system of corridors, creating an Institute of Defensive Magic. This is another place. It's a Bergen Kunsthalle, which some of you might know, a quite famous international place, and a very beautiful post-late constructivist building, which we transformed architecturally into slightly. The transformation sometimes was radical, as with this previous building, or sometimes it was an addition, so subtle, like the addition of this Palladio architectural details that people who have not been in Bergen, of course you see that it's slightly too big, so this grotesque a little bit, but if you would not pay attention, you might not even have noticed that the building, neutral white space, is being transformed in a little bit into Stalinist architectural direction, because we were very much interested in this transition from constructivist to post-constructivist aesthetics. This is another space which has this beautiful rotunda, and we built this construction inside with, you see now the installation by Anna Opperman. This was so the previous one was the Institute of Disappearing Future, and this is the Institute of Anti-Formalism, where we had works connected to this actually very dialectical notion of anti-formalism. And as anti-formalist aesthetic always claimed actually that the real life is something much richer and much full of more possibilities than any art. This is why we opened a window in this room, and there was always a window from late 20s, but it was actually always closed, never used. So for the first time, and I guess the only time, we actually opened a window besides those rotunda. So this is the Institute of Imaginary States, where we put different installations and other works and even videos on those platforms. And among those, there was the NSK project by Irvin, which was already mentioned today. So really very much to the point in our today's discussion, which we also exhibited so the idea in this room was to have a swamp of nationalism. But since it was in the museum, we were not really able to do it on water and even on dirty soil, but this is what we had in mind. But instead of that, we had these wood chips and elevated platforms, which represented those different states. And this is the last, and there was a parkour through all those 11 venues. There was a relatively clear parkour, and this was the end of the exhibition. And room where there was almost nothing, one video work, and mostly the reading room we created was this fictitious bureaucratic door. There is nothing behind it. It's totally imaginary. And also the novel itself is something I define as a happy socialist Kafka. So this is a very Kafkaesque bureaucratic situation in this institute, but the young researchers there, they're actually happy with that and find a way how to work with this administrative bureaucracy. And so this was something we did here. Also very slight changement. This yellow curtain was never there, this door was never there, but it looks like it was ever. And those reading room with some images as a reference to some of our ideas, and this aquarium with an image of a reflecting Hegelian subject, yeah, I would say. So this is Adolf Menzel self-portrait, which is observing us from behind this aquarium. Thank you very much. So, how to close it now? You could help me to close it. So, returning to what I said at the beginning, I would now rather maybe go in the direction of fiction as a topic. Yes, we can close something. That would be interested to listen to. And actually, when we started to create this exhibition, we were thinking our first idea were to invent all the artists, go in the direction of totally fictitious artists. But many of our artists, actually were working with fictitious names. So some of the projects, like Roy Rosen and Vladimir Komornyshkin, or some other artists, actually were interested in this fictitious identity, giving them a possibility to evade any pinning down, so to speak, which comes now from very different directions, from hegemony of the state, but also from liberating discourses, strangely. We are creating another situations which artists might perceive as dangerous.
Sorry. Differently from the other speakers, I think that unrest is still better than fiction. I don't have this feeling that the term is not adequate. I think that fiction has been used very openly, and everything is fiction and everything. So in another side, when you talk about imposture, I like it very much, because it brings a level that I can see here, which you didn't mention, and I would like to hear more about it, which is the dimension of irony. In imposture, you have this position of the irony. Is it something important for you?
Yeah, irony is a great term, although was so misused, and it's difficult to define what is concretely meant. Yeah, of course, irony is something I relate to very much. but maybe we have to go to the roots and to Jean Paul and his definition of irony in German Romanticism. So I'm speaking about irony, I'm a little bit at a loss, because on one hand everybody knows what irony is and everybody is using irony. On the other hand, also in different languages it's a little bit different. I don't know, Nick has to tell us. I have the impression that in strictly speaking native speaker English context it means something a little bit different. So I don't know, but certainly all those situations where you are not what you are and what you are saying, it's not exactly what you mean. But imposter is also when you're playing a role and you know that this is a role that the other people might not knowing. That's something certainly interesting. And imposter also implies the relation of power.
I just have a very good quote about irony from a Swedish publicist, a journalist called Herbert Tingsten, who was a liberal newspaperman in the 50s, and he said, in newspapers, irony must always be printed in red ink, otherwise it can be misunderstood.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Yeah. Sometimes also people somehow unlearned irony, I have the impression. So this is why I like very much to speak about irony of history. So this is something I certainly can relate to, but irony as an everyday speech gesture becomes problematic sometimes. Yeah, I just can tell you. So when I was talking to people in Cologne, where I now work, and you know that Katrin Romberg used to work there. She's from Austria, and she was not very popular. And people tell me that, you know what, we did not really like what she was doing. These Austrians, they do not have any sense of humor. I said, what? Austrians do not have, and I don't know who has a sense of humor, if not this Austrian Empire, including Eastern Europe, like this region. And they said, oh yeah, maybe that they see it as irony, but we in Cologne, we see irony. Irony is not sense of humor. This is for them. So irony is something they cannot relate to, and sense of humor is something very direct, like you love. So there are also this position which was strange to me, but irony is not sense of humor.
But yeah, I was also thinking about Zdenka, your presentation, and what Zizek was saying about the dangers of irony in relation to over-identification. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Of course, that irony has been integrated in the dominant system. That's the, it's a very known thing, of course, but I think it was in the 80s, maybe it was not so visible as it is today. And that's why I think that the NSK was rather advanced. And I don't remember at that time any other artistic project that would be so kind of looking for the alternative for irony. That's why I think that the over-identification was very important, and probably still is. We see, because there is, I think actually it is a very actual issue, how to find the alternative to the irony in terms what I was saying before, in terms of how the system capitalized it.
Yeah,
And it's the same with criticism, It doesn't mean that we stop being ironic or critical, but it's very important how to redefine it and how to, how to deal with it. Also in art, I don't believe that all critical or, it became a mainstream, we know about it, the political art, the ironic art, the critical art, all these things are the things that the market actually demand, but it doesn't mean that we need to go to opposite way now.
I think that irony is a great subject to explore, and one has to really go into the political dimension of irony through its history. I recently wrote about boycotts, and I said that, okay, boycott for me is too simplistic a gesture sometimes, but then I said there are different grades between boycott and irony. And irony, this is something much more complex than boycott. On the other hand, this is what you use in a situation of a total lack of political agency. Then you are ironical, and this is your only weapon. And maybe there were situations where it was like that.
I think the nuances are very important. That's why we were talking also yesterday about the terms, new terminologies, and you know. So of course we are sometimes, or even quite often, obviously inventing new words. But it's not when we are talking about new glossary. It is also important somehow to use the existing words, like you know, very fashionable is common, and it's also one of our referential fields, to make a distance of the same word, how it is, what it means in another capitalized context.